Hi, I'm Sarah Fry. Welcome to PaTTANpod. Today we are on location at the 2024 MTSS and PBIS Advanced Implementation Forum. Whew, that's a mouthful. And guess what? I've got more alphabet soup to come at you today, but it is all in good fun and good learning. Joining us today is Dr. Robert Balfanz, the director of the Everyone Graduate Center at Johns Hopkins University. You are leading several programs and projects on school improvement, and today we're going to focus on kind of one element of that, going back to that alphabet soup with the new ABCs.
That's right, and student success systems.
Yeah, before we dive into that though, I do have to give you credit. You are a big name in our world of MTSS and PBIS. Do you want to take a minute and highlight some of the work that you've done and what you're passionate about right now before we dive into the ABCs?
Absolutely. So we're at the Everyone Graduate Center, and we're an applied research development and dissemination center that works with districts and schools and states to figure out how do we make sure all our kids graduate ready for adult success. What stands in the way, and how can we remove those obstacles? And in doing this work, we initially started out doing a lot of work with comprehensive school improvement, and we still do. And we found that could make a lot of difference. That was a lot about improving or strengthening, let's say, adult capacities. But we found when we did that, and we could see improvements in the school and their outcomes, there was still a large number of kids falling through the cracks. Often because we know one of the reasons why we do this work and we need these extra student supports is that, student need is not evenly spread across all our countries, all our schools, sorry. It's everywhere, but it's also concentrated in a subset of schools where there's many, many kids who need a great lesson every day and something else. And schools weren't necessarily designed for that something else at that scale when they were initially thinking of it. So that's what we thought about. How could we sort of help schools get ahead of this? And because when we started doing this work, I would say in the mid-00s, the standard thing for middle schools and high schools was not to do anything for a student who needed extra help until they failed a class, until they became truant, until they got suspended. And then you're doing sort of remedial, restorative work, which is possible, but hard. And we said, are there ways we can get ahead of that by identifying some signals that kids are starting to wave their hands saying we need some help, and offer it then, earlier, as opposed to later after it's reached a higher level. And that really started our work with the early warning indicators. Our research center in Chicago sort of co-developed this together that showed that things like, it makes total sense when you say it now, but attendance, behavior, course performance were of course all predictive of course passing and promotion to the next grade and just attachment to school. So that launched really all this initial work with early warning systems that many, many schools have adopted. And then that in many ways influenced and helped further extend MTSS in our alphabet soup here. And it's sort of, in some places morphed together. And that was really the origin of this work. And then where we are today, and we're going to talk more about, is that really, especially coming out of the pandemic, that elevated student need to yet another level. It put more schools came under this thing of like, we weren't really designed to have 200 kids with early warning indicators. Okay, now we can get them early, but it's still a lot of kids to get to. So we put our heads together. We actually came together, all the folks that have done this work, this early warning on track work. So the Chicago group, our group, AAR, who many community schools have worked with. They have their great tracker tools. Many schools might remember districts from the early 00s. And BAR and some other groups, and said, we do more together than apart, and how do we create the next generation of this work? And that's really what got us to this idea of a student success system, and as we're going to talk about today, and I won't steal our thunder yet, but this idea of the second ABCs, or the well-being ABCs. We talk about them in different ways. But
I don't even need to be here. I can go get coffee because you just teed yourself right up for the next segueing right into that. You just very quietly hinted at the old ABCs. I caught that. I don't know if our listeners did. But could you tell us, what are the new ABCs? How are they different? How are they connected to the old version?
Sure. So what the research showed is that students trending towards being chronically absent, and chronically absent is missing 10% or more of the school day. So it's like, if you're missing 10% of the time you've been enrolled by November, you're not officially chronically absent yet. You haven't missed 18 days, but you're trending towards it, and that's a warning, and we should at least figure out what's going on. So that's like the attendance traditionally. And then, behavior, what we found is that before kids get suspended, they often get referred to the office. There's like earlier, so pay attention to those and then figure out what's going on so you don't get all the way to the suspension. And that before kids fail a class, they're failing a quiz or they're not turning assignments in. And if you look at those, you can get ahead of it. So that became the traditional ABCs: attendance, behavior, course performance. All of those were predictive of would kids stay on track to graduation, and they were all actionable by schools. And so that's why it became very powerful. What we learned over time, and especially influenced by the pandemic, is as powerful as that is, and as fundamental, we still want to do that. No one is saying don't stop with the traditional or the initial ABCs. But when you get to 200 kids signaling they have one of those, it puts a lot of strain on the school because, once kids even get an early warning indicator, you're still in a situation where you have to change a behavior or solve a problem. And that often involves slightly customized approaches. And that's a lot of what these teams do. And even in MTSS, it's a similar thing. They give insights, and there's a degree of customization for the student's situation. But if your volume is too big, you're not going to get to all the kids. You just aren't, as much as you try. So that was one thing. We got to figure out how can we get that number lower so it's even post-pandemic. And then we also knew, and we talked to a lot of teachers and counselors and asked them, what's working about your student supports post-pandemic, what's not? And what they all said is that, where we're really struggling and where the pandemic really put us back on our heels is our relationships with each other. Student to student, student to teacher, teachers to families. And when you think about it, right, that first year back that everyone was so hopeful and then was so hard, that 21, 22.
Don't make us go.
I know, it's like, I know. But think about a middle school, right? That year, both the 6th graders were new, but so were the 7th graders because they were virtual the prior year. So now 2/3 of the kids in the school are new. There's a lot of teacher turnover that year. So a lot of the teachers are new. So the teachers don't know each other, the kids don't know each other. And so maybe it's not so surprising that was so hard, that there was so much behavioral challenges, so much behavior attendance, because there were no relationships. So they really cued us in that we really have to build these relationships. And then when we looked at some of the literature and stuff on sort of what we've learned about how youth development and even how the mind develops, we've had a lot of learning in the past decade that hasn't quite made its way into some of our student support systems. It told us that one reason why relationships are so important is when there's sort of these positive developmental relationships that they build kids' agency, they build their sense of belonging, they build their sense of connection to school. And that really got us to the second ABCs, or the well-being ABCs, however you want it, which is this idea of agency, belonging, and connectedness. And then the big aha is like, okay, that's how we need to rebuild our relationships. But actually, when you look at it, think about it, and look at it deeper, all of those things drive attendance, behavior, and course performance. So that led us to say we actually now have a universal prevention strategy. Because even with our MTSS and our early warning and even PBIS, like those things still are sort of like get up and going in October and November. It's like you have to wait for the data to come in and do your screening and all kinds of things. But what this told us is we could start day one when school starts, making sure all our kids have this sense of agency, belonging, and connectedness, that we're building these relationships. And that becomes both the universal prevention, and if we do it well, it will drive down the number of kids that pick up the attendance, behavior, and course performance signals. And in general, it'll be good for everybody in the school too. It has both help with student supports, but it will be a positive school-wide benefit, because that's the work we had to repair coming out of the post-pandemic. And the pandemic just showed us those things were always there, but they're sort of in the background. We took them for granted. And some kids never had them. It wasn't like it was perfect, but it was like, it was more normative, and then it got broken. And so that's really where those two ideas were, this idea of these small, I would call them a well-being ABCs, came together and saying that if we focus on both those ABCs now, one helps us with the other, and it creates a more gives us stronger prevention tools which then should drive down the number of kids we need to do the next layer with, which is the more customized supports.
All right, well, I'm sold. So you've convinced me. And I don't mean this rhetorically, but where do you even start? So, you know, ABC, we're not saying you go in alphabetical order, but where should educators and their school leaders prioritize? Where do they pick and choose? Like, what you say day one, what does that mean?
All right, so my answer is you start with the C, which is school connectedness. This is my new passion to champion this.
You're a champion for the C.
Yeah, for the C, yep. Is that, and there's really solid evidence of this, that when kids are connected to school, they come more often, they get better grades, but also their physical and mental health is better, they engage in fewer risky behaviors. And what's powerful about this is it's something schools can do and even measure, which is that kids are connected to school when 4 things are true. When they can say, I have an adult who knows and cares about me as a person. I have a supportive peer group. It can be formal, like the sports team, robotics team, drama club, or just a circle of friends. It doesn't, you know, any of those does that. I believe at least some of the time I do something meaningful in school and something that actually might help somebody else besides myself. It's sort of this fancy term is a pro-social activity. But it just means that we're all human. We actually all feel good when we think we're helping somebody, right? It's not just like, I'm only doing this for me, right? And then finally they feel welcome in school for who they are. And the point is, those are all things that schools can work on. You can do a relationship audit, and we've seen this happen. And it's like you just get like depends on how maybe are you organized on grade level teams, or small learning community, however your sub organization is, homerooms together. Get those group of teachers together that share a set of kids in common, at least to a considerable extent. You know, put the roll up on the board. Give every teacher 2 stickers. I know the student's name, I know their story. In 15 minutes, you have a relationship map. And you can see who are the kids we only know their name and we don't know their story. Who are the kids no one even knows their name, or only one teacher knows their name, right? And that gives you your baseline. And then we can figure out some ways to do that and come back, do it 2 months later, and you can see if we increased our adult-student relationships. Another one folks do is it's the extracurricular audit, because that's where kids make the relationships with each other and across different groups of kids. So it's not always the kids you're in class with. So schools will just say, which of our kids are in no extracurriculars? And like survey them and figure out how can we get them engaged. Like that's like the next step. And then you can do simple now like 2 or 3 question surveys, because our climate surveys could be useful, but our climate surveys are often like 60 questions. And we give them in like March, and we get the results in June, and those kids are gone. And it gives us some, some insights. But people are now making this idea, if we could just ask 2 or 3 questions, we could ask them every 6 weeks then, because we can ask those questions. We all could do. We give, today you get to use your cell phones, kids. You'll be so excited. Answer this 3-question poll. Then put your cell phones away. But it's like. And you get quick feedback on sort of the belonging things. And the final story I'll tell just to drive this home is that I give the example of, and this is not going to, this depends on the area you live in. I agree a little bit, but let's imagine either you're taking a bus to school, either public transportation or a school bus provided by your school district, and it's raining out, and you're not from a well-off or even middle-class family, or a lower income or family or so, and you don't have perfect rain gear. So you are going to get wet at the bus stop. If you're there and you're getting wet and the rain starts to get a little harder and you basically feel nobody knows me, nobody cares, the only rational thing is to go home. If you believe that, no, when I get to school, like Mrs. Brown will be there and she'll be saying, I'm so excited to see you today. My friends will say, like, why weren't you here today? You missed this cool thing. We're doing this cool project in science that's like going to help the environment. And I know when I walk in wet, no one's going to make fun of me. If I had that sense of belonging and connectedness and agency, I'm going to get wet and go to school, right? And that's the power of those ABCs to sort of drive the other ABCs.
Oh my gosh, I love that. And I'm also imagining, in a perfect scenario, you've got another student who's doing those pro-social movements, and they're sharing their umbrella.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Because they're helping.
Right.
They're doing
Right.
something meaningful for that other student.
Yes. Yes.
You've given us a few tips, and I mean that idea of that a powerful visual data point with those stickers on the board.
Right.
Do you have any, are there any other favorite or current strategies that you're just really keen on, whether it's for the C or even A or B, that you're like, hey, if you want to try something, try this next week?
Yeah, so the other one we had, and this was from a school in a rural school in Mississippi, figured this out, and it is about these extracurriculars and getting kids engaged. And in this school, it was like the classic Friday Night Lights, sports culture school. And many of the kids in extracurriculars were like, well, I really wish I could be part of a sports team. And you have to have enough skill to be parts of a sports team. It's not. But what they figured out is like, what if, it was a high school, so they had like JV and varsity, and they had boys and girls teams. Middle schools have those often too. They said, well, you know what? For each one of those different teams, we're going to create 4 positions. We're going to create a photographer, a videographer, a statistician, and a drone operator. And that's what those kids can do on those teams. And then they get to dress up and travel with the team. And it was a fair number of their special ed kids were those kids. And so now they were able to create ways for them to feel part of that sort of extracurricular and that sense of belonging by just creating these other roles that weren't heavy lifts. They had to buy a few cameras, but it wasn't like they didn't have to create like a whole new structure of extracurriculars.
Well, as the lead for the computer science initiative, that just warms my heart too, because we want to get more students involved in really fulfilling activities that might open their minds to a pathway.
Right.
So that's a really cool one.
Yeah.
We've got time for one or two more.
And just the other thing, just to remind some of our schools too, is that sometimes over time we've created barriers to extracurricular participation. This may not be the case in this here, but it is, and I know it's in other places that, during the Great Recession way back in the 2008, 2012, when there was huge budget cuts, many schools introduced fees for extracurriculars, and they ended up liking those fees. When the recession ended, they didn't take them away, and that can be a barrier sometimes for kids' participation. Or sometimes, it's the
transportation,
right? Yeah. Or you have to earn your way into extracurriculars. You have to have good grades and good attendance, and there's something to that as the incentive. But on the other hand, it's sometimes our kids struggling with grades and attendance that need those more than anyone else. So we have to find ways that they can be included too.
Yeah, I think that's important to know that, creating opportunity, you have to think about the context and potential barriers to that. Yeah. So not creating more barriers for those students in that.
Right.
As we wrap up, I've already linked into our show notes the ABC's 2.0 website. You have a number of resources, little videos, downloadables. Are there any last minute tips, resources? If you've got our audience hanging to your every word.
So they should definitely check out the gradpartnership.org. That's this thing that's brought all these groups together, and that website is I think it's a part of that website you're referring to. But on that website, there is great profiles of schools using sort of this next generation of early warning on track MTSS systems, which we'll be talking about today, which are called student success systems. Just a quick aside we got that too from the teachers and counselors we talked to, which was that some of this language made sense at the time. Early warning, even multi-tiered student supports. It's about identifying kids that need help early, but what the teachers were saying is like, the pandemic, we're done with like risk aversion and mitigation, and we really want to have a positive vision to drive things around. And that's why they found the idea of making it like a student success system as like a more just uplifting spirit to the idea that even though they understood the purpose of their language, but like they're saying like times have changed and we got burnt out with like risk mitigation.
That's spot on, right?
Right.
And that's not what we're taught early on in methods classes anyways, is that you try to use that positive language, not the negative language.
So they should check out the gradpartnership.org. And there's also among the resources we talk about, the well-being or the new ABCs, there's also some great resources on chronic absenteeism, which I know is a big challenge that we're all facing today.
Well, thank you so much for your time and making the
pleasure.
Quick drive up from Baltimore.
Happy to be here.
We will absolutely link out to the website and spotlight some of those resources. I'll also mention that the PaTTAN website, under the MTSS and evidence-based practices links, you'll find more goodies there. And if you're watching this and you have not been to an MTSS PBIS Implementers Forum, check your calendar for 2025. The save the date will be coming out very soon. Thank you, John Ragsdale, for producing this episode. Thanks again, Bob, for being here. And last but absolutely not least, thank you to our audience for joining us. We hope you come back to PaTTAnpod again very soon.